Hey everyone, it's Kevin. I'm doing a few last minute things for my topic today, so just hang with me just for a few minutes. I thought I had it all lined up, but I did not. Hope you're having a good Friday, mid noon, or whenever you're watching this. Hope you're having a good week. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I know we're keeping an eye on the COVID cases in Woodford County, hoping that hope we don't have too crazy of a spike from people traveling and mixing and mingling over the holidays. We don't have church. I believe we're online again this Sunday at uh, at Versailles Baptist Church, and then I think we're hoping that the following week we'll be back in person or have the in-person option. So I'm looking forward to that. If you're wondering about the Sunday school, I believe our policy is going to be till the end of the year that we're going to be just virtual. So we're not going to do in-person Sunday school. So just that's like everything. We wish it was different, but it is what it is. So you can look forward to taking advantage of that um, this week. All right, loading these up right now. Looking at doing some Sunday night stuff. Maybe my daughter just texted me sorry, and I have no idea what that means. I'm a little nervous now. But that's what's coming up. Christmas season is here, and we are always having a little bit different schedule when it's Christmas time, but uh, even more so because of COVID. But let's see if I can share this here. Play. It's like a well-oiled machine on a Friday afternoon. Let me kill this music. All right, play. Nice. Here we go. Here's what we're going to do today. First off, I'm going to do a little um, debriefing on Wednesday night. We had a great Wednesday night Nite Class. We had Mr. Lewis came and speak, and he talked a little bit about some of his passions and preferences about Christmas movies and just fun stuff, and gave some practical wisdom. We've been doing that with our Nite Class, having some sort of adult in the community share a little bit about themselves, and then ultimately about their faith. So it was good. And then we had Jackson Cabell and Mia Van Hoos, who just did a great job interacting with me on a challenging subject. We talked about social media activism and Jesus, and so it's super important that that parents get that part of discipleship is walking with your students on in social media. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. One of the things that I am reinforced in is that the more I read, the more convicted, zealous I am about the fact that parents need to be more engaged with the content that their kids are consuming online, and they need to be having regular conversations, not interventions, but just ongoing conversations. I know it can be as simple as what's the weirdest thing you saw online, or what's everybody mad about today? And those are great introductions um, to some good conversations. So, and I just finished reading the book, and I'll share that with you probably a little bit later, maybe not, maybe another day, by um, an author talking about some of the issues with teenagers and gender confusion. And there's a whole section of it. I know I talk a lot about social media, and I don't know if you consider YouTube social media, but man, YouTube is huge in influencing kids, especially uh, teen girls, on some very important things. And there's some other platforms that I had underappreciated. So uh, we'll talk about that on another day. But I'm excited to talk to you about a subject I'm passionate about, which is books. Um, and so what I've done is I've made a list of 10 books. Actually, it's going to end up being a lot more than 10 books by the time we're done. But I've got 10 books that I want to share with you that I think every parent should read at some point. Now, as we go through this list, one of the things that you're going to notice is that almost almost none of the books are about parenting, and that's by design. I know when people ask, what's a good book you would recommend for parents, that they may by default be thinking about how maybe thinking what are some strategic books about how to be a better parent, how to avoid pitfalls and those kind of things, and I may have a book or two like that in here. However, these books, I've go ahead and throw the title up here. 10 books every. And let me just tell you, the point of these books is not necessarily to make you a better parent, but to give you a library of resources so that you can be a better discipling parent. And so I think, well, I've noticed in my life, when I'm reading something, I'm more likely to share it. So like I go through seasons where I read more and read less, and I'm in a season right now where I'm reading a lot, or listening to audiobooks a lot, and almost, well, every time that I had go through a season where I'm reading a lot, my kids go through a season where they're hearing a lot about what I'm reading. And so my daughter might come down the stairs from just to bring some dishes down, and I'll grab her and say, I just read this thing. It's really interesting, really surprising, captivating, startling. And so I'll just grab her for just a few minutes just to kind of tell her what I read. And I think that's helpful for a couple reasons. One, it's good for our kids to know that we're reading, that they know that as Christians, we should be stretching our brains and stretching our perspective and deepening our context. And so, kids, when our kids see us reading the Bible, reading books about the Bible, reading books about Christian engagement with the culture, whatever, they are learning, even if they don't seem like they're completely amazed and dumbfounded. Maybe they're annoyed because of the distraction in their uh, progress toward whatever they're doing, but they are learning that mom and dad are learning things, and that means that they're learning that mom and dad don't have all the answers. So I think that's helpful. And also, when we read something and we get excited about it and we share it, I mean, our kids do learn what we think is important. They learn what we think is important, and so they learn that mom and dad doesn't stop learning, and they learn that there are some things that mom and dad are really passionate about. And I'll say third, the books that I've picked are not the best 10 books that have ever been written. They are books that cover a variety of topics, so that if parents are reading these books, they'll have a well-rounded understanding of a lot of subjects. And so you can feed your kids, spoon feed your kids out of the overflow of what you've learned. And I know, I think I heard a professor one time talk about uh, some advice he gave to a grader one time, and or a grader who became a professor or something, and the grader felt uh, overwhelmed by all the material. All of a sudden, he's supposed to be a master teacher of the subject, and it's got all these young adults in the class, and he's supposed to be the expert, and and he was just really overwhelmed by it. And this older professor said something that I think is helpful. He said, you don't have to know everything. You just have to stay one step above the class. Just stay one step above the class, And so um, I think that's helpful for parents. You don't have to know all the answers, but you can be finding the answers. You can be adding to the wealth of knowledge that you have as you go. If your kids have questions about a certain subject, then find a book on that subject and become better prepared on the subject. By the way, I'm a great resource for that. I love to encourage parents to read specific books. If you have a topic that you feel like, man, I just don't know much about it theologically or culturally, just email me. I love having those conversations. Reach out and say, Kevin, give me a book or give me an article, and I will we'll try and hook you up with a book or an article that will give you a little bit more confidence to shepherd your kid on a certain topic. So a diverse range of books. The books I picked are largely not long, because sometimes there's a better book that's 300 pages, but nobody's going to read it. And maybe a book that isn't the best book, but it's 150 pages and people are more likely to read it. So when I made this list, some of the books I specifically picked were with the hopes or the aspiration that they would actually be read. And I am a slow reader, and I'm an impulsive purchaser of books. And I know I have a shelf full of books that I read the first chapter of and gave up on. So I'm with you. I'm not a academician. I'm not a voracious reader. I read in spurts, and as inspiration hits me to do it. So I'm going to walk through these 10 books and give you a reason why I think they're important books for parents to read. And I think they are books that maybe, truthfully, if you see this list and you pull one of these books out and read it and forget any of the others, that's fine. Any progress is good. But my hope is that you might pick a book, read it, and think, I like that. I enjoyed that. I want to be more competent guide for my student in theology, and some of these books are theological, and in practice of Christian faith and engaging the culture. So there's lots of different angles that these books will cover, and I hope, and really they're diverse enough that you probably wouldn't get, if you wanted to work your way through them, you probably would not get bored, because the subject matter changes pretty dramatically between one book and another book. So not necessarily the best books ever written on the subject. Some of them are just shorter, more accessible for lay people, and they're not, and they're a variety of books. And a lot of these books really can be explained to or spoon-fed to your kid or student or tween or teen, I think, pretty reasonably. And I think several of these books you could probably hand to your teenager, and some of them possibly you could read with your teenager. So let's go ahead and walk through some of these. I'm going to click through my Sidekick app here, and so let's go ahead and work on it. And these aren't in any particular order. This is just kind of how it played out for me in putting this together. The first book is, I'm trying to get it to share. There it is. Stop Asking Jesus into Your Heart. I don't have all of these books here, but this is Stop Asking Jesus into Your Heart. It's a thin book written by J.D. Greer, and it's a if you could make a title of a book clickbaity, I think this is it, because I know a lot of people who read this Stop Asking Jesus into Your Heart, and they have a very reflexive reaction to it. But this is a book about the gospel and conversion and assurance of salvation. Okay, and so if you go to the first chapter in the book is called Baptized 4 Times. And so J.D. Greer tells in the opening about how he just continually was not sure whether he was really saved. And every time he went to a conference or a youth rally or a camp, he felt like he needed to pray the prayer again and again and again and again. And he said he prayed the prayer countless times because he just wanted to make sure he was saved. So I don't know if that resonates with any parents out there, but this book is great because it talks about what does it mean to become a Christian, and then it talks about what are the evidences that you have become a Christian. What are some of the evidences that you've become a Christian? And so parents, this is big. It will whet your appetite, I think, for a subject we need to get into. There are two major and fairly concerning errors we can make with regard to the subject of um, assurance of salvation. And I think one of the errors is telling kids that they're saved when there's maybe scant evidence that they are saved. And so what happens is a kid makes a profession of faith, they get baptized, and then not much else happens with their faith. We talked about this in Facebook Friday a few weeks ago. And so there's a real danger that you might have a kid who was told at 7 or 8 years old that they're a Christian, but there's no evidence of new life, regeneration, growth, maturity, anything. But bless their heart, they're 100% sure they're saved because somebody told them they're saved. And that doesn't really accord with what the Bible says in terms of evaluating your assurance or confidence of salvation. So that's one error, one ditch. Somebody's confident that they're saved when they're not. The other error is somebody who is genuinely saved, but they have a really tender, sensitive conscience. Maybe they're really sensitive about the reality of their sin, and whenever they sin, they fret about, well, maybe I'm not really a Christian. If I was really a Christian, I wouldn't do that. And so, this book will be helpful for students or parents who may have students who think, I don't know if I'm being good enough. Maybe I'm not being good enough, and maybe I'm not really a Christian. And so both of those are things that this book will address. The kid who's probably lost but thinks he's saved, and the kid who's saved but continually worries that they're lost. And so that's the first book. Again, in no particular order, I'm sharing these. Here's another book. Let's see if I have a copy of it here. These are two books, actually. I'm going to squeeze a lot more than 10 books into these reviews. This is by Jen Wilkin. Jen Wilkin wrote two books called one, None Like Him, and another, In His Image. And these are theological books. They're theological books. Don't let that spook you. They're really well done. And let me just tell you this, just my side. This is just 2 cents here. Some of the best theology books out there that are being produced are being produced by women. They're being produced by women. And this is just my superficial judgment on that, is when men write theology books, they are genuinely writing theology books for pastors. They're writing theology books so that pastors will retweet and share and promote them about how brilliant and how awesome they are. And one thing that I've noticed with Jen Wilkin and other female authors, I'm reading another book right now by a female author that covers lots of apologetics and theology, is that women authors tend to write for normal people. They tend to write for normal people. And I want to point out, and this is a bit of topic of a lot of conversation on social media, this book was not written for women. It was not written for women. This isn't a woman's book. Anyone can read this. One of the things, again, this was a topic of discussion online, and it's probably more than you want to know, but publishers have, a publisher made the decision on the design of this book. Publisher made a decision on the design of this book. And so, and I was at a conference one time where Jen Wilkin was there, and she made a joke that it looked like it was painted with estrogen. And so that tells you a lot about the publishers, that they wanted women to grab this book. And so it's not a real, it's not a book that would jump out for a guy, but men and young guys, you should grab this book. There's two books, by the way. If you see the one on this color, teal color one, is this book is about how God is not like us, none like him, the attributes of God that are different from us. He is omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipresent. Like, these are all things that are true about God, that are only true about God. And so that's what this book is. The other book, In His Image, I don't have a copy of that here because it's probably at my house. In His Image is a book about how we are supposed to be like God in holiness and mercy and justice and goodness. And so, at the risk of giving you too much theology in a Friday Facebook, there are two categories of God's character. One is His incommunicable attributes. Incommunicable attributes. Think like an incommunicable disease. His incommunicable attributes are things that are just only true about Him. Like only God is omnipresent. We're never going to be omnipresent. And then there's the communicable attributes of God, and those are the characteristics of God, the qualities of God that, to a much different degree, we can become like. So God is merciful. We can be merciful. God is righteous, so we can be righteous. He is truthful. We can be truthful. So the orange book, or the orangish book, or the peach book, is largely about how we can be like God in certain characteristics. Great books. My wife, Dana, she was going through In His Image and loved it so much that for a season in our family, we were at the breakfast table just kind of reading a paragraph here and there from the book to as our morning devotion. And it was absolutely useful for that. And that's something you might think about. Okay. The next book is Confronting Christianity by Rebecca McLaughlin. She is a British, well, she lives here in America now, but she's still British author. She spent a lot of time in England, which is very post-Christian. So she did a lot of work on college campuses in a country that is very post-Christian, which means that she's learned how to interact with people who are skeptics and cynics. A lot of times we write books to Christians that the arguments are only persuasive to the Christians and not really persuasive to unbelievers. But Confronting Christianity is a great book. I'm going to show you I don't know if you can see that, but these are the topics that she covers. It's an apologetics book, but it's more of a cultural apologetics book. And so here are some of the topics. Aren't we better off without religion? That's not the kind of question that I heard when I was a teenager, but it's the kind of question our kids are going to hear when they're in college, definitely, but probably before then. Two, doesn't Christianity crush diversity? And that's a kind of a pushback on, well, Christianity is a white religion, evangelicalism is a white faith, and Christianity isn't diverse. And some of the other questions, how can you say there's only one true faith? That is a timeless question that we always deal with. How can you take the Bible literally? Chapter 8, doesn't Christianity denigrate women? That's a very good chapter. Isn't Christianity homophobic? That's a great chapter. Doesn't the Bible condone slavery? Just so many topics, and Rebecca McLaughlin addresses those topics in a way that is really interesting. And I want you to know, and I keep up with Rebecca McLaughlin on Twitter, and I actually got a preview copy of her next book. So she's got a book coming out, 10 questions students need to ask. So basically what that is, it's taking this book here and she's repackaged it for tweens and teenagers. So I'm dying for this book to get out. I think it's going to come out probably in March or April. When that book comes out, I'm telling you folks, that's a book that you're going to want to buy for your kids. And I'm so excited. Kind of like I said earlier with theology books, a lot of people write theology books for pastors. So many apologetics books, especially cultural apologetics books, they're written for pastors. They're written for eggheads. And we desperately need books on culturally delicate issues written to our kids. There's lots of books on sexuality and lots of these things. They're all written to adults. They're all written to adults. That's my wife calling in. And we need books. I'm just passionate about this. We need books written to to kids. Like, we need to be handing books to our kids so that they can read for themselves and not just be spoon-fed from youth pastors. So the next book is The Price of Privilege. The Price of Privilege. And I don't know if I have that book here. The Price of Privilege. It's here somewhere. Oh yeah. Sorry for the close-up. This is The Price of Privilege, and it is a book I just finished probably 2 weeks ago, and it is a secular book. So I think I've got 1 or 2 secular books, and let me read the subtitle if you can't see it. Let's see, spotlight it. The Price of Privilege: How Parental Pressure and Material Advantage Are Creating a Generation of Disconnected and Unhappy Kids. And so this jumped out at me because we're in my context. If you're watching this and you're not from Woodford, Woodford is one of the most affluent counties in the state, and people who aren't affluent by relative standards are affluent compared to historical standards. So, I mean, if you're not a wealthy person in Woodford, if you're upper middle class, or even lower middle class, in terms of your economic status, you have more comforts and perks and bells and whistles than anybody ever had in the history of the world. So what we're learning is that we need to redefine what an at-risk kid is. An at-risk kid. And so a lot of times, maybe in the last 10 years, when you said at-risk kid, you have a very specific kid that would pop into your mind. But statistically, if you look at what's going on with our kids, some of the kids who are absolutely the most who are dealing with anxiety, depression, suicide, confusion, and many issues in many areas, those are kids who are fragile, kids who are also affluent. I know if you're not affluent, you're like, not super, maybe you don't feel that empathy. However, wealthy kids are struggling. And having everything their parents could possibly give them, having every toy, great toys, great vacations, a great bedroom, great game systems, great everything, great cars, great freedom. And that's something, a privilege. Kids today have money and they have comforts, but they also have the kind of discretion in terms of their time and energy and access to the world that is unprecedented. And so they're freer. In many ways, they're freer. And all that material wealth and freedom is not creating healthy kids. So I would say, parent, if your kid kind of falls in the category of, mom and dad bend over backwards to give them everything they want and the best of what they want. And I would also say, if you're a parent who bends over backwards to make sure your kids rarely experience discomfort, you should get this book. It's written by a psychologist who I think she's a person of faith. I think she's of the Jewish faith, but I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like that's the case. She's not only a secular psychologist, but I would encourage you to get that book. The next book on the list, again in no particular order, is Resolving Everyday Conflict. And this is a book again, which is very different from the rest of the books on the list. The reason why I picked this book for 10 books every parent should read is because parents need to learn how to get along in a way that honors the gospel. They need to get along in a way that honors the gospel. One of the best ways as a parent can bless their kids is by managing conflict in the home well. One, you will have a home that is exalting the gospel because of how everybody loves one another and how everybody resolves conflicts. Notice, resolving conflict is the goal, not avoiding conflict. If your house is full of sinners like mine, you're going to have conflict. Some parents, some families consider success avoiding conflict or pretending conflict doesn't exist. Resolving Everyday Conflict is not a very long book, and this is, let me give you an example so this is the book I showed you earlier. It is a shorter book than this. It's a shorter book than this, 125 pages, and just talks about how you can manage conflict in your life. I think that applies to your marriage. It applies to you and your kids. And one of the best gifts you can give your kids is to help them understand how to resolve conflict. And one of the things that the book teaches, and it's based on a book, there's a fatter book called The Peacemaker, and I have that here if anybody wants to borrow a copy of it, a fat book about it. There's two extremes that people go to, fight or flight. That's not new to anybody. Fight, means that whenever there's a conflict, I'm going to amp it up and go more aggressive, and you can get more. There's a slippery slope, if you will. Fighting over here, you can fall off of the slope here. Fighting or flight, and so everybody kind of has a default towards fighting or running from fights or running from conflict. And this book talks about kind of staying in a peacemaking mode. I'm not fighting. I'm not running from fights. I'm resolving that. And so really short book, really helpful. If you can teach your kid to resolve everyday conflict, boy, they will, you may save them a lot of pain in this life. Okay. Next, Spiritual Disciplines Within the Church by Donald Whitney. He's known mostly for his book, Spiritual Disciplines of the Christian Life. This is a lesser known book, but this is a really important book. Not because it's the just most brilliant thing ever written, but it's an important book because parents have a limited amount of time to communicate to their students how important the church is. And with COVID going on, I feel like we're probably entering a season where we need to reintroduce people to the importance of the local church. And even before COVID hit, we do see this trend in society where people are super busy and they float into church to get a spiritual booster shot, and then they leave. And then they come back maybe when life gets rough. Maybe they come back when there's a crisis, and or when there's nothing else going on. We go to church. Parents, I strongly encourage you to get this book. This is an easy to read book. It's a super easy to read book. In fact, if you have a high school kid, they could read it and they would not be challenged by it at all. But let me just read you some of the chapters highlighted here. Why go to church? Why go to church? And let me just as an audit, parents, if you're watching this, as I walk through this list, I want you to think, one, what would my answer be? And two, what would my kids' answer be? And some of you may have sixth graders and some of you may have seniors, but think through what would their answer be to these questions, okay? Why go to church? Why seek baptism in the church? Why join a church? That's really big, and that's something I'm going to increasingly emphasize. I believe that every mature Christian, every Christian should have a church that they that they identify with, that they are responsible for, and accountable to. And so what that means is every adult watching this, you should be able to name the church that you consider yourself responsible to God for. Like if that church struggles, it's my church, and so I have a responsibility to step up. If they need volunteers, it's my church. I have a responsibility to step up. If there's any way I can help the body here, I'm a part of the body. I care. I'm responsible for the well-being of this church, and also that what's the name of the church that you're accountable to? Who are you accountable to? And so when you join the church, you're saying, I want to be under the leadership of the church, the pastoral leadership of the church, to watch over me, watch over my family, and that is good design that God has designed, good design that God has given us for a purpose. A few others. Why worship in the church? Why witness in the church? Why serve in the church? Why give to the church? Why attend the ordinances? You know, why make a point of being at the Lord's Supper or to watch baptisms? Why fellowship with the church? Why pray with the church? Why learn with the church? And so each of these chapters are they're not complicated. They're very common sense, but they're things that every parent needs to think through. And I think if a parent goes through that book at some point while their kid is a middle schooler or a high schooler, that will overflow. That's one of those books that I think will overflow into the life of your kids. Okay, here's our another book that may seem a little off of the radar, but this is kind of similar to the peacemaking book, the resolving everyday conflict book. This is a book by Tim Keller called The Meaning of Marriage. And so there's two books up here. One's called The Meaning of Marriage, and it's a thick book. I mean, it's a good read. And then there's another book that came out. I don't have a copy of it, called The Meaning of Marriage: A Couple's Devotional. And so basically, it takes some of the main points of the meaning of marriage and sprinkles it into daily readings. So both of those would be really great. Again, just like giving your kids the gift of how to resolve conflict, having a strong marriage, thinking through a God-honoring marriage is a great gift. I mean, if you want your son or daughter to have a God-honoring marriage someday, a healthy marriage, one that isn't perfect but is faithful, you should be looking for resources that will help strengthen your marriage. And I would encourage you, I could say this about several of these other books. If you are not a reader, just look online. You'll find sermons by Tim Keller and talks, panel talks with Tim and his wife Kathy about marriage. So if I'm throwing a lot at you in terms of books, know this: maybe get one of these books and read through it, and pick another book and see what that author has said online. I've told you many times that I'm a slow reader, and something that I've done in the last couple of years, because I know I can't buy every book that I see. I can't buy every book that I think is a good book, but there's so many great books out there. If you just go to YouTube, you'll find the author of that book is probably out there somewhere giving a 45-minute summary of that book. So if you just go to YouTube, and if you don't want to buy this book or some other book, just go to YouTube and look up Tim Keller on marriage. Tim Keller on marriage. So here's another book that is really important. This is called New Morning Mercies by Paul David Tripp. This has been around for several years now, and it's a hardback book. It's always been kind of a pricey book, but it's thick and it's hardback. But if you go to christianbook.com or maybe even Amazon, the price of this is getting down to under $10, and it's laid out. Don't be intimidated by the size of the book. It's laid out. I hope you can see this. Each reading is just one day. It's just one day reading, and it's very gospel saturated. And some of you may not be when I say something is gospel centered or gospel saturated, some of you may be scratching your head like, what does that mean? I don't know why Kevin keeps saying that. It means that this devotion isn't just about um, chicken soup for the soul, or here's two things you should do, here's a couple things you shouldn't do. Every devotion is marinated with the graceful truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So even the ought tos and shoulds are anchored in the grace that we have received. So in response to the grace we've received, we are motivated um, to live differently. And I love that. And the title is New Morning Mercies. New Morning Mercies. So every day, every day you get a reboot. Every day you get fresh mercy for the day. And so this is a great devotion for adults to just, I mean, if you don't have a plan for any kind of reading, um, one page a day, stick it in your car, stick it in the bathroom, stick it somewhere where you can just grab it. Don't take your phone to the bathroom. Take this book to the bathroom. And so, moving on, the prodigal God. And I've got, just by the way, just so you know, I've got lots of copies of these floating around my office. And if you know me, you know I love Tim Keller. And Tim Keller has this great book called The Prodigal God. And it is a book that walks through Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son, and the story of the prodigal older brother. And it's really great, really quote filled. And what I tell people is if you read this book, which really, what the heart of this book is this, that there are two ways to be lost. There's two ways to be lost. One is to defiantly reject God and squander the good gifts he's given to you because you've decided that you're smarter than God, you know better than God. And we know that didn't work out super well for the prodigal son. But a lot of the book, I want to say almost more than half of the book, is about the older brother who is revealing the other way to be lost. You can be lost by rejecting God, and you can be lost by performing for God in a way that in your heart, God is obligated to save you. He's obligated to be good to you because you've earned it. You've deserved it. And so it's a great book. And what I've found from reading this book, and if you listen to any of Tim Keller's ministry, uh, you'll hear a sermon or read another book, and like the substance of this kind of finds its way in almost all the other books that he has written, and it has affected how I read the Bible, because as I'm reading the Bible, I'm asking myself, am I finding the grace in this story, or am I looking for a way for me to feel puffed up because I'm performing, I'm doing well, and but it's all about grace. The rebellious son deserved grace. The rebellious son needed grace, and the rule keeping older brother needed grace. And when Jesus walked on the earth, he had prostitutes and tax collectors, and he had Pharisees and scribes, and they all needed grace. And that's the heart of that book. The next book is an older book by John MacArthur called The Gospel According to Jesus. The Gospel According to Jesus. And so this is the book I have right here is a reprint, and I'm not sure when the original first came out. Oh, 1988, the first one came out. I have a newer version of it. John MacArthur has been a faithful expositor of the Bible in California for decades. He's been a pastor, I think, for over 40 years. He has a bit of a reputation in the last few years for being a bit more cantankerous, and some of his public engagements with people and some things anyway. Um, And so sometimes if I mention John MacArthur, you might have somebody who only knows about him stuff that's been said in the last year or two. Don't let that steer you away from this book. This book, here's what I love about this book, and I read this book at a very timely point in my life, and uh, it breaks down into just all the different kinds of teachings of Jesus Christ, but it puts an emphasis on a cure from easy believism. Easy believism. This book was written as a response to a movement of celebrating the lordship of Christ, and celebrating Jesus as Savior but not Lord. Okay, so he wrote that book to say, okay, well, what does Jesus think about the gospel? Is Jesus downplaying his role as Savior, as Lord? And the answer is a resounding no. It is Savior and Lord. And so this isn't a book that you would necessarily have to read from beginning to end. You could just open it up and find your favorite parable or something that stands out. You don't have to go A to Z through the book, but what you see over and over again is that to receive Christ isn't to receive him only as Savior, but to receive him as Lord, to receive him as Savior and Lord, and that Jesus is really clear. So many times we soft pedal the gospel because we want to get a yes from the person we're trying to share the gospel with. And what we learn from the actual teachings of Jesus Christ is that he didn't do that. He wanted to make sure people were very clear. And I know as a pastor, it is tempting because you want people to make a profession and be baptized, but they need to walk into the faith with eyes wide open, realizing that Jesus Christ is saying, take up your cross and follow me. Count the cost and follow me. And several people in the New Testament walked away from Jesus because he was clear. But we don't help anybody out by being unclear or making it seem like less of a commitment than it really is. So I think that's a great book. A couple more. One that I've read and one that I have not read. This one is a new book called Gentle and Lowly. It is written by Dane Ortland, and maybe next year it wouldn't be on my list, but because I read it this year and it just hit me where I needed to be hit, I'm going to pass it on to you. This is it may be a good balance to the Gospel According to Jesus by MacArthur, but this is basically a book about and celebrating the gentle and lowliness of Jesus Christ. He was fierce, he was strong, he is the King of Kings, he's the Lord of Lords. But as you read this book, it will be a good medicine for your soul whenever you think you're not worthy, or if you think you're inconveniencing Jesus Christ, if you think you are a bother to Jesus Christ. Just read it, and you'll see that the more broken, the more distressed, the more distraught you are, that such is the person that Jesus Christ longs to love. Okay, so I'm going to give you one more cluster of books. I'm going to do two. One, I just got this, haven't read it. Just make a mental note. I'm sure it's going to be on my top 10 list someday. Family Discipleship by Matt Chandler and Adam Griffin. Lots of practical stuff, not a lot of philosophy, but lots of practical stuff. And so let me get to my last cluster of books, which is probably the most controversial, is books on sex, gender, and sexuality. Books on sex, gender, and sexuality. Parents, this is something you're just going to have to catch up on. You're just going to have to catch up on. And if you're not a reader, but you feel very insecure about engaging with your student about sex and gender and sexuality, reach out to me. I can point you to YouTube videos and sermons and podcasts and articles and certainly books here. But it's not it's not okay to be behind on this. Okay, I shared on our Facebook group, Youth Ministry Parents, VBC Parents Only. Your kids are going to be discipled on sex, gender, and sexuality. They are going to be discipled. Okay, they're going to be discipled. The question is, are they going to be discipled by YouTube influencers, um, other social media personalities, um, celebrities, memes on Instagram stories, dramatic TV shows, and I'm not picking on this show for any particular reason. I'm familiar with it enough to know about it. I mean, if your kid watches Grey's Anatomy, and there's some compelling actors and storylines in Grey's Anatomy, but if your kid watches Grey's Anatomy from A to Z, they have gotten an indoctrination on sex, gender, and sexuality in a compelling way, in a well scripted way, in an emotionally manipulative way. And so, um, these books are just the baseline for you to be fortified in your own convictions so that you can have a conversation with your kid. And our conversations need to be more than very superficial and that's wrong. Okay. Most of the books on this list, one, two, three, four, one, two, four or five of these books, one, two, three, four, five out of the six of these books are written by people who have either struggled with same sex attraction, or they were raised in a home where that was the norm. Okay. And so I'd encourage you just to pick one if you feel like you need to catch up. Let me just walk through what I think is where I would start if I were a certain person. So if you are a person who is kind of sharp edged in your opinions about things, maybe empathy isn't a strong suit of yours, I would encourage you to read Messy Grace. Messy Grace. Messy Grace was written by Caleb Kaltenbach. Caleb Kaltenbach was initially raised by two parents, male and female parents, who both then um, came out as same-sex attracted, and he was raised going to pride parades. And the book is very honest about some of the hateful things that he experienced by Christians growing up, but it also talks about his journey of encountering the gospel and how it's kind of amazing here. He basically had to come out to his parents as an evangelical Christian, and that was really a challenging thing for him. And so it talks about how it blends his story with Bible teaching. So it will create empathy in you if you're kind of a black and white person on the subject. However, if you just want to know good arguments from the Bible, Kevin DeYoung's book is probably the best. The rest of the books are two of them are by Sam Allberry. Sam Allberry's book is brand new. Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With? Which is beyond the issue of just same-sex issues. His book on the bottom right, Is God Anti-Gay? Is a really small book, more of a reference book. Christopher Yuan's book in the top middle is his kind of it's not his story, which is great, but it's his kind of biblical explanation of sexuality, holy sexuality, and he is one who has struggled with same-sex attraction, and he was a guest here at our church a couple years ago. And on the bottom left side, There's a book that has the coat hanger on it, Transgender. And so that's a very, very short book that just kind of gives you an intro to that subject. In a week or two, I'm going to present another book that I think is one that everybody needs to read. And let me look at my list to see if there's anything I forgot. Anything I forgot. All right. So these are the books. I hope this is helpful to you. This took always it always takes longer than I expect it will take, but if you want to know about getting a good deal on one of these books, if you want to just pick my brain about where I should start, happy to do that. Love to do that. Love talking books. Love encouraging people to read books. If you're a slow reader, if you've tried to be a reader and man, you just can't seem to buckle down and read, reach out to me as well, and I will send you YouTube videos that will give you a lot of the same content. I subscribe to something called Scribd, and so it has some books that you can read online, and it has audiobooks. And so, like today, from the moment I got up to the time that I got into church today, just moving around here, I'm listening to a book. There's a book called Another Gospel I'll talk about some other day. But if you're not a reader, but you're traveling the car a lot, or while you're shaving or taking a shower or whatever, want to improve your knowledge so that you can be a resource for your kids, audiobooks could be a way to go. YouTube videos can be a way to go. Many of these books are not very long either, so I would encourage you to maybe check some of them out. And I do think, as somebody who is a slow reader and as somebody who gives up on books really quick, try to cultivate the habit of being a reader. Try to cultivate the habit of being a reader. And there are some great articles out there about helping you become a reader, And so sometimes there's just some simple habits of life that we're doing that undercut our progress in becoming a reader. So anyway, hope you have a good weekend. We'll post this on YouTube at some point, and for people to chew on it again. If you have a spouse that maybe was not able to see it live, that might be interested in it, by all means, encourage them to check it out a little bit later. I hope you have a good Sunday. And remember, if you're at First Hills Baptist, at the time that we recorded this, it's December 4th, and so we don't have in-person church this Sunday. Just watch your email and text for what the plan is for the week after that, whether we're in person or online. Anyway, hope you have a great weekend. God bless.